Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. This is an episode that we recorded pre-COVID in a rapid-fire succession in Boston with Jayme Amos. I had an absolute blast at Tufts with Dean Hanlon there and presenting to their students. I was very grateful to be invited. And this is one of the conversations that Jayme and I had about establishing culture in a practice. He's obviously coming from the startup perspective, but some of the conversations that we have here and some of the exercises that he lays out are applicable no matter what. And this is one of the many things that Ideal Practices absolutely crushes every single time, is this culture, passion, purpose piece of a dental practice. And I think so many dental practices miss this. So this is an episode definitely worth listening to. Also, Jayme's been telling me some pretty amazing stories of startup leveraging people who are in the midst of the startup process during all of the chaos of the past few months, and despite that, have been thriving on their process. So I might get him on here soon because some of the stories are pretty amazing. So you might think, is this the right time to do a startup? Is this the right time to do an acquisition? Absolutely. Practice ownership is not off the table despite all of the uncertainty moving forward right now. And in fact, sometimes there's some opportunities to be had. So we'll talk more about that and we'll see if we can get Jayme back on. But here we go with Jayme Amos. Okay, welcome back, Jayme Amos, to the podcast. We are on a marathon now of, I guess this will only be the second episode in this season for our listeners, but it's been nonstop. If Jayme's not recording a podcast, he's doing a video or in front of students or at a dinner. We've been here in Boston and it's been amazing and nonstop and incredible. And here we are again.
I would bet that of, let's say, the 45 hours we've been in Boston, I'll bet you we've been recording in some form or let's say we've been here for 45 hours and we've been awake for 20 of those.
Sure.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
20, 25? Yeah. 25 of them. Of the 25 waking hours, I'll bet you we've been recorded for 15 to 20 of those.
Seriously. Yeah.
It's been an interesting ride.
It's been great. So we left off last episode with the purpose of your office and the purpose of your organization and how having a purpose that you are intensely passionate about makes all the difference when it comes to leadership and culture. I wanted to get into what this looks like when you're building a team, when you're making those first hires and you're having to then communicate that purpose and communicate the experience that your patients, you want them to have, that maybe, isn't directly related to, a lot of that's logistical of making sure that this employee knows how to do these things and has support and all of that. And to have to do, we were making this point in the elevator on the way up just now. One of the hard things about a startup and why we've been acquisition biased is if someone's doing it on their own, they have to be good at all of these things from day one. Hiring, training, leadership, customer service, teaching your team how you want them to answer the phones and how you want them to schedule and how you want them to set up an operatory and how there's just so many decisions and so many failure points that it's on your own. Like there's just no way, unless you've been doing startups, there's no way you're going to be proficient at everything from day one, your first time you're doing it. And therefore that's where you guys step in. So
if you asked me to do a crown prep, you might say, Jayme, come on, it's not that hard.
It's not, man.
It's not that hard. Like you just do the thing with the burr and then you do the thing with the cement and then you call your lab guy and I'm like, what's a freaking lab guy? I don't know what that is.
Right.
And then I have to learn, but then I have to figure out which lab guy. And then I have to figure out, is it shoulder or chamfer? And which, I don't even know.
You throwing out dental terms.
Terminology. So I think it's a little like that. I think with a startup, there are so many integral pieces of the puzzle that all have to work in unison.
Yeah.
And I think that's why so many startups get such inconsistent results.
Yeah.
Because any one of those things could be a failure point or a weak point that isn't even recognized.
Sure.
But it's slowing down or hurting the success of the practice or hurting the potential of the practice or hurting the reputation of the practice. And then it can be really hard to pinpoint how to fix it. I think with a startup, the opportunity is you get this chance, you get this shot, you get this one moment to get it all right the first time.
Yeah.
If you don't get it all right the first time, it's not that you're going to die. Like you're not going to like turn into a pumpkin just because you didn't get it right the first time. But you will struggle for a long time instead of having it right the first time.
So let's take hiring as a really specific example. And I can't even stay on my examples without tangents. With an acquisition, you almost have to come into this and develop a purpose as a team. With a startup, you come in with a purpose or a give, and then you have to communicate that and hire to that. And that's different. So how do you help your clients hire their first team members? What are the specific things that you do, or the places where it could go wrong that you're like, okay, don't do this, do this? What are some specific nitty-gritty nuts and bolts kind of things that we can talk about with hiring to get people on board that are going to carry out this kind of vision?
Do you mind if I start with some of the give strategy?
Yeah.
If I
sure
pull out a cool example. You ever hear of Tom's Shoes?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were going to describe Tom's Shoes in a sentence, like you know the company.
If you buy a pair of shoes, they donate a pair of shoes to someone in a third world country.
Cool. And then if you're a doctor listening to this, you could probably relate to that. But if you have never heard of Tom's Shoes, go check out their website at some point, and you'll see right on their homepage, it'll say buy a pair, give a pair, or something to that effect. Okay, so here's the fascinating piece of what just happened. I'm going to talk about Richard for a second. I asked Richard about shoes, and he told me about values. That's weird. Mm-hmm. Like what you didn't say like, oh, it's this kind of shoe, or it's this kind of comfortable, it's this kind of, or they were founded here, it's this Argentinian design. So do your patients have an opportunity to say that about you?
Right.
So the weird thing is, if you don't tell them what to say, they certainly won't say it. Okay, so what does that have to do with hiring? I'll get to that in a second, but I want to point out something else super fascinating about this.
Okay.
Like from a quantifiable, scientifically proven, data-driven reality of this Tom's Shoes thing, there's a study of the Worldwide Brand Index. The top 300 brands in the world were studied a couple of years ago. And in the top 300 brands, Nike was in the top 100, and Tom's Shoes was right near the bottom of like number 300, which is a pretty amazing accomplishment for Tom's Shoes. Tom's Shoes is a relatively small company. They're like a $400 million business. Nike, on the other hand, is a $9 billion company.
Right.
Massive company. But they both showed up in the Worldwide Brand Index. So Nike and Tom's Shoes, if you look at them on a graph produced by the Worldwide Brand Index.
And the brand index is not a brand index of shoe companies. That's of all companies.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I was like, oh man, Tom's Shoes, 300 out of 300 shoe companies? I was like, that's a bummer.
Thanks for pointing that out.
Okay.
Yeah, of all brands across the world, recognized
that's
brands.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
So Nike is up near 100. I forget the exact number. Tom's Shoes is down near the bottom, near 300. Cool. Good job, Tom's Shoes. Like, amazing. You guys are like little scrappy fighters. Cool. Okay. So the Worldwide Brand Index then went further and decided to create a graph where, if you can visualize it, on the left side of the x-axis, that side of the axis represents awareness of brand.
Okay.
The right side of the x-axis, if you can visualize this in your mind, to the right of the x-axis is the representation of consumer willingness to purchase once made aware of values.
Okay.
The company values. Consumer willingness to purchase once made aware of the values.
And then on the bottom is all the different companies?
And all the companies are ranked from, well, they're the dots. They're the lines that go from left to right.
Okay.
So Nike starts at number like 100 on the left side of this brand awareness index, and Tom's Shoes starts near the bottom of this thing, brand index awareness. As the graph goes from left to right, imagine in your mind 2 points on the graph, Nike near the top, Tom's Shoes near the bottom. As the graph goes from left to right, Tom's Shoes gets closer and closer and closer to Nike, the closer we get to the cash register when made aware of values. The real fascinating part is when we actually get to that point on the y-axis, the point at which the consumer is confronted with the choice to purchase and made aware of the values of the organization, Tom's Shoes surpasses Nike. In other words, at the cash register, Tom's Shoes wins.
Okay.
The mind-blowing part of this is that Nike spends more on marketing than Tom's Shoes does in total revenue. Nike spends more than $400 million on marketing, which is more than Tom Shoes makes in a year.
Right.
But Tom Shoes wins at the cash register when the consumer is made aware of their values.
Okay.
What does this have to do with hiring?
Okay.
The best hires in your market have a choice about where they want to work. They are buying into someone's business.
And they're purchasing with their time.
Sure. They're giving you their life.
Right.
They're giving you their human hours. They only get a few of them.
It's a big purchasing decision.
Yeah. And they're going to choose. So what I recommend is when you're creating a job ad, like I would strongly recommend describe the amazing parts of the practice, not the job description. Describe the culture of what they would be buying in the same way that you would say, these shoes are incredible because with every shoe that's sold, we give a pair to those in need. Never once in a Tom Shoes ad will you ever see the polypropylene plastic on the bottom is layered 14 millimeters thick, compromised, but like what? No one does that. And your new hires are similar in that scenario. So first of all, I would say start with your values. At Ideal Practices, I can tell you what we do internally when we're looking to make hires. In order to make a good hire, first of all, you have to know who you are, because it's really hard for someone to choose you if you don't know who you are. For example, if you were getting married, it's hard for a spouse to choose you if you're really unsure of yourself or what you represent or who you want to become. The marriage becomes much harder. Similarly with an employee. So what we've done is we distilled all of Ideal Practices values down to 3 words. And I've told you about them before.
Yeah.
They are elite and trusted and give. Elite, trusted, give. That comprises everything about Ideal Practices internal culture in those 3 categories. Elite, meaning that we will perform at a very elite level. We will surpass expectations. We will be best of class. We will hold ourselves to a high standard. We will be elite. Trusted, we will be trusted in our performance, trusted in how we communicate, trusted in how we deliver a service. We will earn trust every day. Our whole team knows this. We actually include it in our team meetings. We talk about, how are you elite today? How did you prove you were trustworthy? Which defines what the team will be gauged by.
Right.
So you have to be really careful what words you use to describe and what gauges you set on your dashboard, because the gauges on the dashboard are the only thing the driver knows how to read. Like if you just imagine, like if you put on a dashboard the rotations of the tires per minute, like that would be much harder to calculate than just the miles per hour. Like, wow, rotation. That might be an interesting statistic, but be careful what you gauge, because your employees will be measured and perform up to that gauge. So we measure elite and trusted and give. Give represents our philanthropy, our core philosophy of some of the things we've talked about. So when it comes to making a good hire, I would say start with that. Start with who you are. Start with what you stand for. Start with what the brand, what the company, what the culture is about. And in the same way Tom Shoes will attract buyers with their values at the point when it matters most, remember that your future employees are making a decision when it matters most for your practice.
Awesome. And on top of that, you talked about for any given market, there's a spectrum of people, not only in their skill sets, but also the attitude, the passion, the drive they bring to that practice. And everyone knows a team member who just is willing and ready to jump on anything and learn and do their best and always look to improve, versus someone who you feel like, okay, we've trained on this, we've talked about this, we've re-emphasized this, and it just seems like your heart's not in this. And so on that spectrum, and that's a very nebulous thing. On paper, these two people look very similar. They might have similar experiences. They've worked in a similar number of years in dental offices. But that person who has that intangible initiative and drive and desire for excellence, that's almost not something you can train. It's they've either got it or they don't.
A lot of it, I think, could boil down to like natural human tendencies.
Yeah.
Words like curiosity.
Sure.
Are they that's curious about things? Do they enjoy finding solutions to problems?
Okay.
Because That's what human existence is. We're dealing with one problem after the next. That can sound pessimistic or it can sound like a cool opportunity.
Right.
Like I'm solving mysteries every day of my life. This is so fun.
Right.
I find challenges and I solve mysteries. This is great. Some people don't want that. And if you're a startup, there are unique things for a startup practice that have to be contributed to by the first few employees. They have to be. But at the same time, there must be a skeleton to put some of this muscle structure on. There has to be the initial bones of this being called your startup have to be established. If the bones are not established, then somebody else is going to be establishing the culture or establishing the protocol. And if you don't have the bones in place, then this creature could end up looking really weird.
Right.
So one of the questions becomes, when I'm doing a startup, should I hire somebody with a bunch of experience or somebody with not much experience? Do I want to hire somebody who's like fresh out of the oven?
Right.
So I can help mold?
Right.
Or do I want to hire Grandma Jean who
seasoned?
She's been there forever. She's seen it all, done it all, and she's got it all figured out. For a startup, I would recommend neither are safe.
Okay.
I think we need to find somebody who's more toward the middle, who's not a family member.
Okay.
When I say not a family member, the natural tendency is to have your mom or your spouse come on board and be a part of this. But I think that can be incredibly unhealthy really fast. A lot of times there's this natural tendency to say, well, I trust that person so much. I want them on board. We've always dreamed of working together. This would be so fun. There's a couple of problems with that. Number one is if it's your spouse, couldn't your spouse, not all the time, but couldn't your spouse go get a job that would pay more anyway? Like more than, I don't know, what, like 10, 12, 20 bucks an hour at the front desk. Your spouse, there's a good chance that your spouse could earn more doing something else, which could financially benefit the practice. But there's also this thing where, I don't know about you, but sometimes at the end of a working day, I want to stop talking about work.
Thinking about work and
my gosh,
revisiting.
If your spouse, like I would much rather be able to come back to my spouse and kind of like unwind and like have her help me figure out some of these things and maybe enjoy some of that discussion instead of feeling like, oh, that discussion has to continue.
Yeah.
Now, listen, that's not the right answer for everybody, but I can tell you that the practices that I've worked with who either hire a spouse right out of the gates or try, or hire a parent right out of the gates or try, it seems to me that the frustration rate is pretty high.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that. And I would say maybe a hygienist might be the exception. If your spouse is a hygienist, what do you think about that?
I think it could be a really good idea because the hygienist isn't going to be there doing a lot of the decisions are not going to be clinical decisions.
Right.
A lot of the strategy, the decompression, the issues are going to be either process, systems, front desk, or marketing, topics like that, the business side of the practice. But clinically speaking, if the hygienist is chairside and doing their thing, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
Less risk for sure.
Yeah. Well, and so I hate to do the George Hariri thing, which was take Jayme's amazing startup concepts and then try and retrofit them in an acquisition or existing practice. But this is a season on leadership, culture, and change, and we're going to hit pure startup content later. So now I'm thinking, first off, this, coming to this point where you have a give, you have a purpose, you know what you're all about as an existing practice. Maybe you did a startup and now you're 2 years in and you're like, crap, I should have done all that at the beginning. I should have hired Jayme. It's too late, but I still want to do these
Which
things.
somebody just said at dinner 2 nights ago.
Yeah, no, exactly.
She said that next to us, sitting right across the table from us.
Yeah.
She said, the one thing I regret, she kind of looked down. She said, I followed your stuff. I read all your stuff. The only thing I regret is I should have hired you guys. And then she quickly switched to the topic. Amazing woman, really nice. She's doing a nice job.
Yeah. So now we're in that situation. Now we're trying to hire. So the takeaways would be, you want to be very clear about the culture you're building because every person you bring on is going to either give momentum to that culture and the changes you're trying to implement or take away. And so being clear, stating that very clearly, being intentional with how you hire, I think is one of the quickest ways to kind of shift a culture is if you figure out, okay, maybe this isn't working out. Someone leaves the practice. Someone lets themselves go because you're trying to make changes and trying to improve, and they no longer kind of fit. And now you're bringing someone in. Now let's talk about training and onboarding. How do you do that in a way that's different, or is it just where do startups are a great case study. So we'll go back to startups. Fine.
Well, that's all I know.
I know. So where do people go wrong with training their team members? And what do you guys do differently? So if someone was doing a startup on their own, they've never trained anyone, and they're like, oh yeah, I'll just train my people. And they hire some people. And they're like, okay, we just got to do dentistry. You're in the front desk. Where do people go wrong?
So here's a real easy one. Let's say for a startup, there's a doctor who's been using Dentrix forever, but then they hear about this really cool practice management software on some forum or some Facebook group, and they say, "Ooh, all the other kids are using that, so cool kids are using it, so I should use this other one too." And they kind of like the demo, so they get this other software.
I'm a cool kid. We use Open Dental. Sorry.
Or like whatever
I'm
the new one. There's always going to be a new one that comes around. So the doctor who's doing a startup ends up purchasing the new software and isn't comfortable with it. So they need to learn it in the same way that you need to learn a new language. The practice management software is a version of a language inside the practice. So if a startup goes and chooses a different practice management software, it becomes a really difficult uphill struggle because the doctor is learning a new language and is being looked at as the authority in the practice on how to communicate in this language. So if the team members come in, regardless of whether, I think a team member who's coming on board to be hired needs to understand the same language as the doctor because there's a lot of, there's a lot of nonverbal communication. There's a lot of protocol. There's a lot of reporting that needs to be done that the team will assist the doctor with, that the team will follow the doctor's lead on. If the practice management software is not a shared language between the new hires and the doctor, it becomes a big setback. It takes so much brain power, so much effort, so much learning curve for both the doctor and the new team member. As opposed to if you've used, let's say, Dentrix your whole life. Sure. If you've been in an associate position, you've got 2 years of Dentrix under your belt, stick with Dentrix and only hire people with Dentrix experience.
Interesting. Okay.
Because it cuts out so much of the extra stuff that you have to deal with. So first of all, I'd say make sure that you play to your strengths.
Okay.
With something like Dentrix so that you're staying in your own lane. You're not trying to learn something new because you're giving birth to this new baby.
Right.
We don't need to learn a new language and give birth to a baby at the same time. And secondly, I'd say make sure that you have those things defined that your practice is going to be standing by and hire people who have that experience. And so it brings up the discussion of like, do I hire for more experience? Do I hire for more culture? And how do we do that for a startup practice? I think there has to be a balance of hiring for skills.
Sure.
Hire for the personality.
Right.
However, make sure they've got the background experience on the core things like
baseline.
The practice management software.
Okay. You do something before they open, which I think could be applied to hiring someone, which is practice run of opening day. Tell me about that in terms of training your team members. What's
the dress rehearsal?
The dress rehearsal. Let's pretend that we're going to do this in a low stakes situation. So, let's bring someone on and have them do, set up a room when there's not actually a patient coming in 3 seconds, or how, a series of exercises that you can do to train them up. So tell me about the dress rehearsal. So
dress rehearsal is actually a culmination of 4 months. So we spend 4 months building up to this point
of training.
Yeah.
So what's the training? What's in the 4 months then? Screw the dress rehearsal. Let's go backwards.
So the dress rehearsal is the culmination of this. We call this the Startup MBA. You've heard us talk about it before.
Yeah.
So the Startup MBA is all the business systems, the protocol, the policies, the financial guidelines, the scheduling techniques, the insurance strategies, the insurance negotiations, even the marketing strategies, and the patient experience. I'm sure I'm missing a couple things, but you get the idea. It's the core business systems of how to run a business before you open. One of those is hiring. So the hiring process, we usually start the hiring process 3 to 4 months before they open up. That doesn't mean we're going to make the first hire before then, but we want that person to be brought in at the time when all these things are being established so that those things can exist before the person actually starts on their opening day. In other words, I want somebody, when a new hire comes on board, I don't want them creating the new systems. I want the skeleton of those systems to already be established for them.
Okay, this is a great point that I feel like definitely applies either way. And I've seen people in startup situations hire someone and then say, I want you to help me figure out what we're going to do here.
It's awful. It's a really, really bad idea.
And I think
And
people in an acquisition or existing practice think they have a system, but what they really had was a competent person who just took care of it. And now that competent person is gone, they realize I don't have an assistant or a system for this. And so making sure you have the systems in place before you bring someone on is essential for training. I mean, it sounds so obvious when you say it that way, that like you have to have the thing that you're going to train them on to train them. But I think the opposite happens in startups and across the board in dentistry, where people just bring someone on and say, yeah, you're doing scheduling. And they're like, how do I do it? Well, you just schedule and we'll figure it out. Let's go.
That's a pretty common situation. You and I have both seen it. Oh, you do scheduling? You've done that for 20 years? Cool. Do it in my office. Is that good for your practice culture? Could it be better if you decided what you wanted amongst all the scheduling strategies and then brought someone into that environment? Think about it this way. Think about the long-term effects. If part of your new hire culture is that they come in and make those decisions, do you think it's possible that those kinds of things could increase the chances that team members end up taking liberty that you weren't in agreement with? Or that they end up doing things without your permission that you never would have said yes to?
Right.
Well, why wouldn't they? They were brought into this thing thinking it was their baby to grow.
Right.
They thought it was theirs to grow up. So anytime I've tried to describe something like this, I like to say that it's like having a backyard with a fence. So our first house, we had an invisible fence for our dog. So I've never had like a real fence. And
I don't have a fence. Before our next baby is born and can walk or crawl, we have to have a fence because we've got a pond in our backyard. And that's Christine's like worst nightmare. When we bought this house, she's like, child's going to drown in this pond. We need a fence.
Well, even beyond the safety thing is really important. I love that. Like, right. That's smart. Really good idea. Don't use an electric fence because it doesn't feel good for the kids. They don't like that.
The collars. Yeah.
The collars and all that. But no, think about the fence. If you have a fence in the backyard for your kids, you and your wife get to be more peaceful. You and your wife, you've set up the perimeter. You set up the guidelines. You set up you can play freely here up to this point. I think it's a little like that for a startup business. I think it's important to define what that perimeter is and then give them freedom to solve problems, to create solutions, to make things happen and perform to their level of brilliance inside that backyard. I think everybody wins. The kids can play more freely, the kids can have more fun, and the parents can be less stressed when the fence is there. I think it's a little like that with a new hire. I think if you have, again, we call it the startup MBA. If you have these structured systems in place where actual decisions have been made, like things are written on paper as protocol for this new business, like it just came out of the womb and it already has its core competencies established. It's like giving birth to a baby with a disc profile, right? Yeah. It's like, cool, it's established, it's done. Now we can live freely knowing that that's the way this thing's supposed to grow. And then going back to the skeleton analogy, it's like, cool, if this is the structure of this being, now we can put muscle on it and this thing can grow with whatever shape it's supposed to be. Is it supposed to be tall or short or wide or whatever? The skeleton will help us follow this process. This is why I like the analogy of DNA in a practice. Once the DNA is established, it can self-replicate. So that I'm not only talking about startups, one of the concepts that I love about, have you ever been to REI? The sporting goods place?
Yeah, my gray coat that I got for Germany. I was like, I need something warm and waterproof. I walked into REI and the guy's like, this. I was like, perfect.
Nice. Warm and waterproof. So you chose that instead of a baby seal. Good idea.
Right.
Baby seals
true.
Too, right?
It's true.
So REI, REI has a flagship location. Whenever they open up a new location, they fly the managers in and they do training at their flagship store. That way, the DNA from that flagship store can self-replicate in the other facilities. If for anybody who wants to have multiple locations, you included, I think it's really smart to train everybody at home base,
right,
and then self-replicate outside of the home base. And this goes for culture. This goes for how we speak to our own coworkers. At Chick-fil-A, the Chick-fil-A example that I love to share all the time is when you go to Chick-fil-A and you order your soft drink and you say, thank you, what do they say back?
It's not, of course. It's your pleasure.
It is your pleasure. Right. And they don't say you're welcome.
Right.
Which is fascinating. it's cool that they do that. There's lots of good reasons for it. But it's also very interesting that no matter which Chick-fil-A you go to anywhere in the country, if you say thank you, try it out sometime. You say thank you. They'll say, my pleasure. That's a DNA component of Chick-fil-A. And that can self-replicate. And fascinatingly, if there is a team member who's not fitting that DNA, the body expels it. Like you said, they select themselves out. The body, the team, the organism, this being pushes them out of the system. They don't belong there because they're not part of the culture. So I would recommend that to whatever extent you can, define the culture, whether it's practice management software and you define that culture ahead of time. Make sure you understand that language, first of all, please. Yeah. But define what all that culture is inside the practice. So one of the things that I think would be really helpful for people is instead of something like a mission statement, try this on, create your best possible review.
Okay.
Define the patient experience on the patient size. So, many people will say, I'm going to, if your practice were a play, I'm going to be on the stage of my play and describe how all these people will sit in the theater. And when they're training their team, when they're talking about the experience people have, they're standing on the stage and describing the people in the audience. I want you to get off the stage, go sit in the audience and go look at the stage and describe that. Then use that description of the stage called your practice. Use the description of the stage and the things that they experience and the sensations they have from the seat in the audience and use that to train your team. Because then you're actually training the team based on the experience for the person watching the play, not just the desires of the people performing on the play.
Right. And this once again is great, and I think is a great discussion within this season of this. This highlights a difference between a startup and acquisition. A startup, if you are intentional and you create this DNA, you create the blueprint beforehand, then you've got that as your baseline and you can establish that as just baked into the practice, and you have a lot of control up front. With an acquisition, the hard part is when someone listens to startup content and then does an acquisition, the strategy is different, because to come in and say, I know you guys have been doing dentistry here for 10 years. We're going to do everything differently. Here's the new manual. Here's the new protocols. Here's the new policy. You can do that, but the turnover rate will be high and it will be painful and it will be difficult. And so you're in a different situation where there's a combination of building trust, being patient with the process, incrementally improving different things and choosing the things that need the most improvement and focusing on those and training a team that's used to doing things differently. It's a different problem. You've selected a different problem for yourself. It's either, how do I build something magnificent from nothing, versus how do you remodel? Remodeling versus ground up is kind of what we're looking at. And they're two different skill sets, and they seem similar. It's like, oh, we're talking about buildings, but it's a completely different process to get to that endpoint of the culture and the practice that you want. I love that specific writing a review of your practice. And it'd be a team exercise that you could do and say, in a startup, you write that review and then you use that and show everyone, here's what I would like our ideal experience to be. In a existing practice, you could say, let's sit down and what do you think is the best version of us that someone could leave us a review, and have everyone write that and then take everyone's reviews and come up with, this is the review that we're trying to, taking elements from all of them and combining them together. And how can we do better? And where are we not doing this every time? And creating a plan to get there. It sounds incredibly valuable.
And how exciting, we're talking about some hiring things, right? How exciting for a team member to consider working for a practice like that, that has the experience for patients defined, as opposed to just the calligraphy on the wall that says, we believe in excellence.
Right.
And satisfying every person. Like, really? Who doesn't? Like, for real?
Yeah.
Like, that's what you're going to train people on?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
That's fine. I guess that works for some people. When it comes to the, well, go ahead. What other topics would be helpful?
I thought this was great. I thought
totally different, but
no, this was perfect. I think from understanding the buying decision of someone who is working at your practice. They're committing their life, and how you structure the listing based on your culture and your vision and your purpose, to this last experience of creating a review of your ideal practice. I think these are some very specific things that you can do to influence the culture of your office on either end. On the hiring end at the beginning, coming in and defining your systems and what you're doing and what you're training to. And then on the what's the end product look like to a patient, and how do we get there? And those are there's nuance to that, where you can have two different dental offices, and one's getting these amazing reviews of the experience that they had, and the other one is still doing great dentistry, but it's not the same experience. And getting your team to go from doing good dentistry to having an excellent experience, to having a give, to having a purpose and a calling is the challenge. And it's a fun challenge. It's an exciting challenge. And it is, but it's hard. So this has been valuable. Thank you so much for all of this. Do you have anything you want to wrap this up with, a bow? You can just say that I did it. It's okay.
I think you did it, but I know when you get the right people in a practice, it empowers you as a leader to go impact more people, or it empowers you as a leader to go serve a greater cause. It empowers you as a leader when you have the right people on your team. But in order to get the right people on your team, you could just leave it to chance and hope the people who apply for the job are kind of the right people. Or you could literally define who they're going to be. And then it's really easy to say no to all the other people.
Yeah.
You don't need to hurt feelings. You don't need to disappoint anyone. You can easily and quickly say no because they don't fit what you know you need. You can do this with personality profiles. You can say, I'm a strong this letter on this chart, and I need a complementary that letter on that chart. And you can make hires like that. But you can also do something very similar with culture, with values, with standards. If you say things like, I need people who are elite, who are top of their class, who are best in their field, who've been doing it so long that they're looked at as the experts in their organization for that. That's what I tell people when I look to hire them. I can tell, do they tilt their head down and cower like, oh man, that's not me.
This is my second job.
Or are they like, yeah, sign me the frick up. Like, this is what I'm about. Right. Cool. Let's go. You're the best in class. That's all I want to work with, because that's my team.
Right.
If you can define what you are before you go asking people to join you, you're going to get what you want, not get something by accident.
Right. Well, this has been perfect. This has been a great discussion. And if this was a teaser of more to come with Jayme Amos, we're doing a whole series, a mini series on startups this summer, going through his process that his team has built. Pretty amazing. It always gets me fired up, and I'm incredibly grateful for this opportunity. So thanks for coming on the show.
It's awesome. Thank you for having me. Okay. Great honor. Appreciate it.
Let's go talk to more people.
Here we go.
I hope you enjoyed that interview. I had a ton of fun with Jayme. We were exhausted when this was recorded, and we had no clue what hit us or what was about to hit us. I got back from Boston and was pretty sure that I might have had COVID right up front. Fortunately, did not. Anyways, I thought the exercise that he outlined of having your team write an ideal review for your practice and having that as a team exercise is something that anyone can do right now this week with their practice. And despite everything going on, this is going to help you. It's going to help focus your effort, what you care about, how you want to be perceived, and how your patients, the experience you want to build for your patients so that they're telling other people they're happy to be there. They sense the relationship that you and your team have between you. Anyways, all of this brings a point to that. So I thought it was a great exercise. And like I said in the intro, hopefully we can get Jayme on soon for an update on some of the challenges people are facing doing a startup during 2020, and then how they're thriving despite those. So we will talk with you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.